This is also another reason why I hate people doing detoxes all willy-nilly, because if you've got MTHFR, if you've got COMT or HLA-DR, or you've got some of these other genes that you just can't detox properly, the majority of these products are like, oh, just take this, just take that. Or if you're not clearing these things, you're throwing a bunch of toxins into your liver. If your phase 1 and phase 2 detox pathways aren't open and you're not pooping, that's the third one there, you're not pooping, then you're just going to spill over a whole bunch of other really inflammatory metabolites back into the bloodstream, and you're going to feel terrible. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Jacque Show. Today, this episode was inspired by an episode I just shot yesterday for Brittany Basinski's podcast that you have to check out. If you're on social media, you saw that she just released it today. Today is the 7th, June 7th, so be sure to go check that out. But the transition into this is a topic that has been widely controversial. It's been widely talked about and often misunderstood in the mold community. And it's something that I think is very important for us to talk about whenever we address the topic of mold. Now, when we broach this subject, you saw by the title of the podcast, it's the Homewrecker phenomenon. And the reason that I came up with that, Chris Harder and I were hanging out, we were brainstorming, we were coming up with how I felt about mold. And I'm like, it's the number one homewrecker. And he was like, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, well, it destroys your home, but a lot of the time it destroys your relationship. And so through the years, I would probably even say confidently, I've been on the forefront of this. I've been one of the pioneers in this for years at this point. And fortunately, more functional medicine practitioners, naturopaths, people are starting to understand the importance of mold toxicity and what it does to the body. But when it comes to the homewrecker piece, is a very delicate, very, very delicate piece of this whole puzzle. Most people with mold toxicity are going to have some sort of a hyperactive stress response. Their adrenals are going to be a little bit more chaotic. They can't handle the stress of the day. I even had, again, Brittany was talking about this, agoraphobia. She didn't even want to go outside. She wanted to become a recluse and be a hermit and just hide from everybody. And when we talk about mold, we're like, well, just get out of the house. Just do this. I did a podcast on motivational speakers saying, just get your ass out of bed and just go do it. If you've got mold toxicity, you're not going anywhere. You're not doing anything. And you're going to have a lot of called off sick days. And that's what also spills over into your relationships. Now, the question got brought up by Brittany yesterday and was like, why? What's going on whenever we're talking about the homewrecker phenomenon? What do we mean by that? Why does one person feel like their life is falling apart around them, and yet the other person, the other spouse, is like, I'm totally fine. I don't feel terrible. I'm tired occasionally. I've got allergies. These low-level things are like, oh, this is just a normal part of life, even though it's not. And then you got your spouse over here who is rectally bleeding. They've got cancer. They've got unbeatable depression. They've got all of these symptoms. They've been everywhere. They've been to all of the ologists that have ever been created, and still nobody can pinpoint what's going on. And when it comes down to the relationship aspect, usually if you have some sort of a healthy relationship, when you start on this journey, it's not like, hey, I've got mold toxicity. Let's go test for mold toxicity. Unfortunately, that's not where most people start. They go to your traditional medical doctors, and those doctors are just trained to test and medicate what they know. The mold aspect of things, they know it's important. They know it's deadly. They've closed down, whole wings of hospitals because of it, but they don't understand the treatment of it besides giving like a cholestyramine type supplement or medication to try to bring the mold toxicity levels down, which is not what we do at all, and we still get the mold out of the body. So when you embark on this journey, picture yourself, and all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, man, my menstrual cycle has just been chaos. I haven't been feeling very good. I've got really bad cramps. I think I have polyps, and I think I need to go to my PCP. PCP says, okay, it sounds like you might be having symptoms of PCOS. Why don't you go to an endocrinologist and see what they can, what blood work they can do, what they can run up, and what they come up with. You leave with a nice little prescription of metformin or some other sort of medication that they want to give you, and then you're out the door and on your way. That could be one introduction, right? That symptom, it's a symptom when we talk about our organ systems. That's a neuroendocrine, right? That's like, okay, our hormonal system isn't really working very well, but we're going to go to an endocrinologist. Ologist is a specialist in the endocrine system or the hormones. So let's go there. They put you on this and it's still not working, or you're having horrible side effects from it, which most people do. Or you get put on birth control next, which is another way that doctors are trying to regulate women's hormones, which is very, very detrimental to their health, to your health. And again, I'm posing myself as a woman in this scenario. I obviously don't have a menstrual cycle. I am a man. I have the proper chromosomes to be a man. This is just female instance, right? What if it's a guy? What if a guy shows up and they're like, Doc, I've had low T as far as I can remember. I can't seem to get it up both literally and figuratively. I can't get it up. I'm pushing rope over here and I don't know what else to do. And so their doc says, well, it looks like your test levels are 100. So let's put you on some HRT. Put on HRT, then all of a sudden you start developing gynecomastia. You're having man breasts and you're like, what's going on? Well, your body was over-converting your testosterone to your estrogens, your estradiol. And then you're like, well, what do I do now? They put you on an aromatase inhibitor. You're like, okay, well, I've got that going for me, but what else? There's toxic side effects of all this stuff. But again, talking hormonally, when you have a hormonal problem, you typically are told and trained and taught that you need to go and seek help from a specialist, right? Endocrinologist, who's the specialist in hormones. And endocrinologists and pediatricians are two of my least favorite sets of doctors. I try to give as much grace as possible, and then I get another new patient in, and I hear what the endocrinologist said, or I hear what, like, here's an example. I had a patient who was diagnosed with PCOS when she was like 15, 16, and was told she was never going to be able to have kids. Now I think she's 47, close to 50, and we tested her hormones, and I'm like, oh, it's a liver issue. You just need to drain these pathways, and the hormones would come out. And she bawled her eyes out. She was like, well, I didn't think that this could be fixed. I just thought only medications could help with this. This is what I was told. And she was told this 32 years ago. And she believed that hook, line, and sinker. And that's the problem with medicine is we go to our doctors who, maybe initially we trust, and then eventually our trust starts to wane, starts to go down because they're treating us the same way as everybody else. If you have PCOS, just treat the symptoms of PCOS. Let's give you this medication. And they don't talk to you about diet and lifestyle and staying away from refined carbs and sugars and processed all of this stuff. They don't tell you any of that. They just take this medication and go about your business. Anyways, I digress. When it comes to neuroendocrine problems, people are trained to go to your endocrinologist. Now let's talk about the adrenals. Okay, the adrenals. Say you have HPA axis dysfunction. You're going kind of crazy here and you're stressed out all the time And then eventually what's happening is it turns into a psychological type thing. The brain becomes impacted from the constant state of stress that you're in. And you've got this constant state of brain fog. Maybe you have headaches or migraines. You go to your doctor works on medicating you or putting you on an antidepressant because your mood is not stable. And you're like, just take this. That's also going to alter your hormones. It's going to alter your gut function, but that's where you're trained to go. This is a real case scenario where somebody can come in to an endocrinologist and say, hey, I'm dealing with this problem. And then a month later, they're like, oof, I've got these digestive problems. Now I'm going to go to see a GI specialist to see what's going on with my gut. And then they're like, okay, you just need this medication. And then you're like, oh, now I have recurring UTIs. So I'm going to go to my urologist and see what's going on there. And then now we're dealing with infertility. So I'm going to go to a fertility specialist or work with my endocrinologist at the same time. And so you start to get this Rolodex of doctors who are all treating you mechanistically. Like if your digestive tract has a problem, let's just treat the digestive tract and function with it over here or work with it over here. Then you've got your neuroendocrine, you're stressed out, so we're going to put you on an antidepressant over here. And then your brain's not functioning, so we're going here. Your energy is down, or you might have increased cholesterol, so let's put you on a statin. So you're treating all of these areas, or you go and you get checked out by your doc, and your doc's like, you're fine. Check my thyroid. Thyroid shows up fine. Check my gut. According to our GI test, you're fine. Let's give you this antibiotic, but according to what we're seeing here, you're fine. You're okay. And you've got this over here. You're fine. Nothing is showing up on the test. So you got two different pools of thing. You either just start collecting disease states as if you're going around on Halloween collecting candy, or you're going and collecting doctor's numbers and you're like, somebody needs to figure out what the heck is going on because I'm starting to think that I'm getting crazy. So along this journey, if you've got a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a spouse, significant other, whatever they are to you, they care about you, especially in the beginning, okay? Hopefully. Now, there's some relationships that I work with, I'm like, man, how are you guys still together? But kudos to you. You guys make it work. But when we talk about this, initially the spouse is all on board. Like, okay, do what you need to do. We'll take you where we need to take you. And then all of a sudden the bills start racking up. They start accumulating. And then the diagnoses start accumulating. And then intuitively speaking, the patient's body who's suffering with all these symptoms starts to question these other doctors. I've got all these diagnoses. It's not really working. I don't really feel good. I'm constantly gaining things. I've never been this sick before in my life. And so they start questioning the doctors. The spouse is over here like, I mean, if you want to question the doctor, I guess you could. And then eventually they dive down the mold rabbit hole because they've seen a post from me or they've seen a post somewhere else on social media or TikTok, whatever. And you're like, you know what? This whole mold thing sounds like it's me. It sounds like it hits me to a T. And the spouse is like, well, we talked about mold, or let's go talk to the endocrinologist and say, I think we're dealing with mold toxicity. See what they say. That specialist goes, no, it's not mold. Mold isn't deadly to you. You forget about that. Then you go to your PCP. PCP says the same thing. Or you go to a GI doc, and the GI doc says that mold has no correlation or causation to anything with the digestive tract. Forget about that. And so that spouse is left there intuitively knowing something else is going on. The spouse is there, but slowly starts to pull away from the one who is symptomatic. Because what happens is usually with mold toxicity, one person feels horrible, the other person feels nothing, or like this, just average symptoms. I'm tired. I'm not getting great sleep. I'm stressed. Okay. We can all say that at some point in our life, some point in our week. We're tired. We're stressed. We're overworked. I get it. We've got kids. If you've got kids, you understand. You never know when you're going to wake up at 4 a.m. Apparently my son woke up at 3. because his water bottle wasn't in his room and he wanted that. So he was pounding his door down at 3 o'clock in the morning. Fortunately, I'm a heavy sleeper. Megan bit the bullet on that. So anyways, it's how you parent properly, I guess. Anyways, so you've got one side of things where it's like, okay, I feel horrible. The other side of things where like, I feel nothing. And then what happens is if you do have kids, you bring kids into this scenario, mama's gut intuition is almost always right in these instances. Okay. And you'll see what happens. And a lot of this does come down to a genetic component. There are things you can do for certain genes that code for, improper detoxification pathways. There's one in particular that is like, it's not a death sentence to you, but it makes it really freaking difficult for you to detox properly and know the difference between mold toxins in your body. So there's a lot that goes into it. We'll talk about that. But what happens is when we come together and we conceive, we share our DNA. Basically, we splice some stuff together, and then we pass that down to our children. So usually if one of the parents is hypersensitive to mold toxicity, the other might not be, you come together, you conceive, you pass those genes down onto your children, and those children are also going to have a higher prevalence of having sensitivity or excessive symptoms when they come in contact with mold. Prime example, just given from my example, when I was suffering with mold toxicity, Megan didn't really know what was going on. She just saw the man that she was about to marry just boom, plummeting down and was falling apart in front of her eyes. She didn't really understand it because she didn't really feel it. Okay. Then we came together. Obviously, we've had kids. We've had 2 of them. Our son, I remember we were out in Ohio. We were adjusting out in Ohio, and we took him to this one little venue that we were adjusting in. And for me personally, I was dizzy, falling over the table. Couldn't remember like my name half the day. And like patients I've had for years were coming to get adjusted. I didn't remember who the hell they were. And I was like, man, this is horrible. And our son came down in that basement, that event center that we were in on the basement floor. And he was down there playing on the carpet, moving around, whatever. And then after it was all said and done, I told Megan, I'm like, babe, we got to get out of here. Like, I can't continue to function at this low of a level. I got to get the heck out. So we went to this brand new hotel, a beautiful hotel in Sugar Creek, Ohio, the Wall House. And again, brand spanking new. And we got a nice little room there. And we went to go put our son down in the pack and play. And he was screaming in so much pain. I'm dizzy. I have a headache, screaming. I'm getting angry. Hoyt's reacting to my anger. Megan doesn't understand what the heck is going on. We ended up having to leave. I went down to the front desk, and I don't know if, I'm sure they'll be fine with me telling you, like, this is how great this hotel was. We were like, listen, like, I know that we were going to stay here tonight, but we got to go home. We got to drive 2.5 hours to go back home because this kid is going ballistic in the room. And it was because he was exposed to mold during the day and his digestive tract was just inflamed. It was so painful to him. So usually, again, one spouse feels it, one spouse might not, but your kids are more than likely going to be more susceptible to it because one of these genes, I'm sure, is going to get passed off and down to your kids. Okay? That's the first aspect of this, is the genetic component. So we're going to go through, I'm going to pull up my notes here, but we're going to go through the different genes that could be coded in here and turned on that would cause you to have difficulties with extraction or getting rid of mold toxicity, okay? And again, this is another reason why you can't treat one person the same exact way you treat another. When it comes to mold, sometimes I can slaughter the mold out of people and get it out in like 3 months, 6 months, like boom, awesome. And they can handle it versus others who you don't want to over bombard somebody's detoxification pathways if they've got one of these genes are not being attended to. Otherwise, you're throwing a bunch of toxins into the liver. The liver's like, I can't really do much with this. And then it's just recirculates or recycles it back into the bloodstream. And then the patient's left feeling horrible while they're doing detox. Okay? So the first The first one is going to be the dreaded one, the one that it's not kind to your body. It leaves you susceptible to a lot of other diseases that are out there, and disease states as well. But it's a powerful one because this one basically blocks your ability to detox properly. And this is your HLA, okay? HLA-DRB, okay? Or HLA-DR, okay, is what that's going to be called. Now, this particular gene affects, it depends on where you're looking, but the majority of the sites in the research that I saw, it can affect anywhere from 40 to 60% of the population. It's a large sample size, 40 to 60%. And those are just the people who are aware of it. You know, I haven't tested myself for HLA-DR. I probably have it. So then I would be another number to jump into that statistic. You don't know that about me unless I test it. And that would be the follow-up question. Well, how do you test it? You can test it. There's a way to do it. Okay. You have to do HLA-DR typing and basically see if you have a positive for the antigen of the HLA-DR. Okay. There's a couple of other like variations and stuff that you can get, but doing that particular test is going to allow you to know if you're going to have difficulties with detoxing, not just now, but in the future. Okay. So what happens, what makes this so harsh for these patients is that your body can't tell the difference, kind of like in an autoimmune condition. Your body can't tell the difference between a mycotoxin or a mold toxin in your own body. So when you are exposed, it responds to a heightened threat, but it causes so much more inflammation in your body, and then you can't get rid of these toxins unless you're nurturing it and taking care of it, but you can't get rid of these toxins that you're being exposed to. So these are people who, you know, I had a patient who she would go into grocery stores, random stores, random homes, random locations, and she would do like a 45-second restart. So she would just boom, her husband would count 45 seconds. She would just basically shut down, and then she would come back to, and then be able to go about the store. Like that's like the level of intensity that these people can experience. These are also ones who will have what we call multiple chemical sensitivities, or MCSs. This is where, yeah, we talk about mold toxicity, but then you might have adverse reactions to spray foam. Or I had a girl who was sensitive to the mudding compound that you used for drywall. And it was due to mold exposure. Her body didn't have the ability to detox those things out properly. So you have to nurture that, get those toxins out of the body, and then also be aware that you have to support those detox pathways for life with that particular genetic code, if you will. Okay. The other thing here too is what happens is, or the HLA, well, with really mold just in general, mold is what's called lipophilic. It loves fat cells. It loves to hide in fat. That's why a lot of the times when we have mold exposure, we have either right shoulder blade referral pain from gallbladder, or we have difficulties with digesting fats, or we just have the whole gallbladder removed because the mold toxins cause so much inflammation to that organ that the organ then suffered, it elicited symptoms. We were trained to go basically remove it because gallbladder is useless, just like the appendix. Go just take that pouch out and we'll move on from there, which could not be further from the truth, okay? So basically, when you have the HLA-DR, you're going to be more susceptible to things like autoimmune disease, mycotoxin illness, yeast infections, candida, etc. Okay, so the goal then would be is, okay, if you're like, well, I'm being exposed to mold, I'm way hypersensitive to it, okay? And there's a difference. Like if you go into an environment and you're like a sensor and your body just falls apart on contact, you probably have a positive find for the HLA-DR, more than likely, okay? If you go in and you're like, I just feel a little bit crummy, you leave and you feel fine, okay? When you leave, you feel fine, then you probably don't have the HLA-DR. You can still have it, don't get me wrong. But again, if we just guzzled toxins being in a moldy environment and we leave and your body calms down, that means the toxins that you had are starting to get detoxed out of the body without help and support. okay, which means usually those pathways are open. All right. The next gene that we'll talk about is my favorite and least favorite gene because I have it. So it's MTHFR. Okay, it's a mother effer of a gene. The cool thing about this one, though, is it's really easy to work with and treat. It's just a lifelong supply of B12 and folate, and my body will be just fine. So similar to the HLA-DR, MTHFR, I feel like I'm just making up my own alphabet, my mold alphabet. MTHFR also makes it difficult for people to detox properly. Okay, there's portions of your detox pathway that require methylation. MTHFR just basically decreases your body's ability to methylate properly. Okay, the way that it does that, okay, is again MTHFR. You need to be able to promote detoxification properly. What it also does is it helps your body to naturally produce glutathione, which is your body's master detoxifier. Okay, that's why with mold toxicity, we work with, sometimes we'll put people on glutathione sprays or NAC, N-acetylcysteine, which is a precursor to glutathione, to help to promote these particular pathways from taking place, or influence these pathways to take place. What else happens is we need to be able to control the hormone or the hormonal aspect of things. Okay, if you have MTHFR, you typically have poor estrogen clearance. So we have a lot of estrogen dominant type symptoms too. When it comes to mold toxicity, again, having too much estrogen is very dangerous because mold can cause cancer. A lot of estrogens, okay, feed cancer. We have estrogen receptor positive cancers, so it can fuel that process. Okay, it could also lead to more oxidative damage, which would then lead to more symptoms, more disease, more cancers. Yeah, so that's a fun one for you. Controlling inflammation. This is one that's going to be really big as well. So with MTHFR, there's an aspect of this where sometimes people get blood work done, and you'll have this number, homocysteine, that goes through the roof, and then you can't seem to get your vitamin D levels to be normalized. Okay, there's an aspect of taking in sunlight and then working with vitamin D, homocysteine, this whole little pathway thing that you're supposed to have. But basically what will happen is you can be exposed to as much sun as you want, but your body doesn't produce any vitamin D from it. And we have an accumulation of homocysteine. Homocysteine is an inflammatory marker that's highly dangerous for you to have it at really moderate levels to high levels. Homocysteine can act like a shard of glass. It's just rolling around your arterial pathways that are trying to basically knock out any plaque that can cause thrombosis or cause clots and things like that to take place, deposit in the brain, the heart, the lungs, wherever you can get a clot at, okay? So it's really important to note that when we have an issue with mold toxicity, mold causes inflammation in the body, but then if we have MTHFR and we can't bring down our homocysteine, we're bringing up levels of inflammation and we're not able to clear it out. So therefore, we are going to be more symptomatic. Now, population-wise, we had 40 to 60% with the HLA-DR. We got at least, and I'm saying this, at least 40% of the population has MTHFR. Okay, and it is possible to have both. Okay, which would make it really difficult for you to detox properly. All right. So MTHFR is really important, but you need it ultimately to be able to produce, in the terms of mold toxicity, we need it to help to produce inflammation. And then we need it to be able to produce glutathione to help our bodies to detox properly. Okay. So what would you do for this? This is one of those ones where if you think that you have MTHFR, you're not sure, you want to treat it anyways, it's not going to hurt you if you do. Go to our e-store, okay, on our Instagram page, doc_Jacque, go to the supplement store and get Ultra B12 Folate. Okay, get that product, all right? And then if you want, if it's your first order, type in first 10. In that order, you get 10% off of that product. But that's what we use for MTHFR. Okay, it helps tremendously. It's one pill a day, super simple to do. If you've got kids, there's a liquid drop that you could use as well. There's different levels based off of how big your kid is. But if you need help or support, just reach out and we'll be able to help you with that. Okay. So that one's easy because you treat it super easily. All right. The sooner you catch it, the better you're going to be, the better your kids will be. Okay. And again, it's one of those ones where you can definitely test for this. MTHFR is super simple to test for. You could do it through Vibrant Laboratories has it. Some people will do 23andMe and then code that out. That test freaks me out just because I've heard too many conspiracy theories about it. So I'm not doing that one. I'll let other people do it if they want to, but I'd rather just go and get a blood test done, get the MTHFR and other genes and stuff coded in there. So that way I can figure out what I have and what I don't have. Okay. And you'll see like different types of MTHFR, different types affect different areas and can cause certain other things. Okay. The next one, okay, if you haven't noticed at this point, the genes that make it difficult for patients to get rid of mold toxicity all deal with detoxification. The next one is going to be COMT or COMT, C-O-M-T, okay? This one is one that also directly influences methylation activity. So getting rid of those estrogens, getting rid of those toxins, making sure things are in a safe state, getting it out of the body. COMT is one of those ones that is responsible for that certain amount of clearance. Okay. Now with MTHFR and COMT, something that's really unique is when we do like our Dutch tests, it's not 100% one-to-one in that if you have a low methylation gauge, doesn't mean that you have COMT or MTHFR, but it at least gets me to start thinking like, well, listen, if you've got all these excess estrogens, but your methylation is horrible, maybe we're dealing with something that could be genetic that we need to work with treating, again, with an ultra B12 folate or something else. So COMT is usually your B vitamins, get some B vitamin support so that way you can detox these things out properly. Okay. So there's ways to treat these things. The HLA-DR is the hardest one to work with, but the MTHFR, super simple. COMT, super simple to work with as well. And again, it helps with your detoxification pathways. This is also another reason why I hate people doing detoxes all willy-nilly, because if you've got MTHFR, if you've got COMT or HLA-DR, or you've got some of these other genes that you just can't detox properly, the majority of these products are like, oh, just take this, just take that. Or if you're not clearing these things, you're throwing a bunch of toxins into your liver. If your phase 1 and phase 2 detox pathways aren't open and you're not pooping, that's the third one there, you're not pooping, then you're just going to spill over a whole bunch of other really inflammatory metabolites back into the bloodstream, and you're going to feel terrible. And then your friend who sold you the cleanse is going to say, that's just detox symptoms. Just fight through it, right? Trust me. I've heard it, seen it. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. Is that like Farmers Insurance or something like that? Anyways, I've seen the thing or two. So knowing that, we definitely want to make sure that we get those things out of the body. We nurture those things and help your body. Again, from a symptomatic standpoint, if it's a woman, they could tend to be more emotional because they're going to have more estrogen they're not going to get rid of. Men, then you can have an increase in conversion from testosterone to estrogen, and that increased conversion between testosterone to estrogen is going to lead you more estrogen dominant. You're going to have gynecomastia that takes place, or basically you're doing an accidental sex change because your hormones are all flowing into the estrogens, and estrogens are just piling up over and over again, and they're starting to overwhelm. You're having an overwhelming amount of female hormones versus male hormones, which can then again make men more irritable, more emotional, more irrational. So again, it can make people respond differently based off of these genes. And so you can see this again, we're talking 40 to 60% for the HLA-DR, 40% for the MTHFR. I'm sorry that I didn't look up the stat for COMT, but we're hitting around that 50% threshold, right? So again, if we have two people in a relationship, then theoretically speaking, you can kind of, okay, this is roundabout, you can kind of extrapolate that you probably one of two, so 50%, around 50% might have one of these genes, okay? And then for MTHFR is a little bit easier for people to get diagnosed with without having blood work done, genetic testing. If you have any midline deformities, cleft lip, tongue tie, lip tie, if you've got epicanthal folds in the corner of the eyes, if you've got scoliosis, if you have something like this, more signs are going to be pointing to you having MTHFR. So it's a little bit easier to kind of diagnose. It was one of the things that got me curious about it, and sure enough, tested positive for one of the genetic codes of MTHFR. Okay, and some symptoms kind of corresponded with that. So it's cool to see that. All right. Now, with all of this here, okay, we talked about the genetic aspect of it. There's a couple of other genes that can play a part. There's one, it's GCLC, so glutamate cysteine ligase regulatory subunit gene. And that's another one that regulates inflammation and works with glutathione. It's not one that I run across quite often. It's usually the COMT MTHFR or the HLA-DR, which is why I spent the most time on that, which again builds into why one person can feel it worse than the other. The other one, okay, the other aspect of this is, what is your toxic burden? Okay, what is your toxic burden? And what I mean by that is, how infected are you? How toxic are you? If your body, okay, has accumulated a ton of toxins, and this is genes aside, okay? We're putting the genes aside right now because clearly you're going to have more of a toxic burden, more of an infective burden when you have these genes, because if you have an infection, when the infection dies, it releases endotoxins or internal toxins that have to process through and get detoxed out. So that's, again, just another component of it. But we're putting that aside. We're putting genes aside right now and saying two normal people, no messed up genes, no mutations, no nothing. And we're like, well, why would one person have more symptoms than the other? Let's talk about things that can damage the liver, right? What were you doing in college? Were you drinking as much alcohol as I was? I wasn't perfect. I drank plenty of alcohol due to a gut issue that was causing me to have social anxiety, self-medicating basically with booze, and then I would have nice anger spouts after that. Were you doing that? That alcohol will damage my liver, okay? There's been a lot of people who took Accutane. Accutane can damage the liver as well. It's why when you're on it, they make you do blood work to make sure that your liver enzymes don't go through the roof, okay? What if you've been on birth control? Women, okay? What if you've been on birth control? What if you've been on a lot of medications? And again, your body, anything you put in orally, medication or supplement, your body has to process through that stuff. Medications are highly toxic. They're highly toxic. If you don't believe me, take a bunch of it and see what happens. You'll die. They're highly toxic, okay? Don't actually take a bunch of it and die. Please don't. I'm just making the example. Like if you have a headache and you take one Advil, you're like, okay, I'm fine. But if you take the whole bottle of Advil, that'll be the last headache that you have, right? Because you're done. That's it. It's over, okay? So what is your toxic burden? What have you done to your liver? Are you still currently an alcoholic? Are you taking those medications that we just talked about? Are you taking a statin that's going to throw off your liver and trying to shut down your cholesterol, and then your brain's going to melt because you don't have cholesterol for your brain? I hate statin drugs so much, but we'll move on from that one. Do you have a history of antibiotic use, antifungal use? Because what can happen is through that usage, we can have a change in the microbiome, and that change in the microbiome can then throw toxins out into the liver. It can cause urinary tract infections, recurring UTIs, okay? A lot of people, especially with mold, have a lot of UTIs. We can have kidney stones. We can have gallstones from it, okay? So those are all kidney, okay, gallbladder, liver. These are all detoxification organs, and some of them extend into the digestive organs, okay? So the more toxic a person is, the more sensitive they're going to be to mold, okay? So if we're just floating through life and you're like, oh, I'm good, and you're carrying around this bucket, okay, your burden bucket, your B&B, your burden bucket, and you come across an infection, you throw some toxic burden into your bucket, and then you drink 37 drinks in a week. There, throw that into your toxic bucket. Then you have a stressful week, which that'll throw into the toxic bucket too, because your body usually craves crappy food. Throw that into the bucket. And eventually, okay, eventually what will happen, okay, some people's buckets are bigger than others, but what will happen is you'll spill over. When you spill over, that's when you have the disease state. Okay? The dis-ease creates disease, and that's when it's really apparent that you need to take care of yourself as well. Okay? So if you have a bucket that's completely empty because you do a good job, you eat really clean, you take a B12 folate, you're working on your detox pathways, your hormones are balanced, etc. If you come across mold, it's just going to be kind of a nuisance to you more than anything else. Might smell, and it's gross. And then you just kick the symptoms out and you're like, that was weird, but I'm done with it. Versus somebody who has a large bucket that's full of a lot of toxins and they just breathe a little bit of mold in and boom, toxic burden flows out, right? Now, again, when we're talking about spouses, different people take care of themselves in different ways. Men tend to be a lot more stubborn than women. How do I know that? Majority of my practice is women, and the majority of the men that are in my practice is because the women cause them to come into the practice to work on themselves as well. It's for whatever reason, it's easier for women to want to take care of themselves than men. Men have like the men complex where we don't want to admit that anything is wrong. We are always invincible. You can shoot us in the chest 47 times and we'll be fine. Like that's the mentality that a lot of men are carrying around with us, which couldn't be further from the truth. Okay. A lot of us are walking around insecure, diseased, and we just don't want to tell anybody about it because we're insecure. Okay. Again, when you have one spouse, they feel it. One spouse, they don't. This could be another component of this. Okay. The other aspect of it is how long, okay, have you been exposed? Exposure rate, exposure amount. If we're currently living in a toxic mold environment, and neither one of you have ever been in toxic mold before, which would be really difficult to say because about 50% of buildings now are water damaged, and that's just what's reported. Okay, not many people want to report that their home has water damage. It knocks the value down when I try to resell this thing, right? So we have never been exposed to mold before. Then we move into a house, and all of a sudden, your health falls apart. You leave the house and go on vacation. You feel fantastic. You come back, your health falls apart again. You're like, what the heck is going on? All right. Look at your toxic bucket. Is there the genetic component? Are you healthier than your spouse? Are you more toxic than your spouse? What's going on here? Okay. And remember, and this isn't to be insensitive to women, but your main sex hormones are going to be progesterone and estrogen. Okay. Your estrogens are going to make you, if they push up too high, which there are molds that do that. They push your estrogens up through the roof, or they mimic estrogen. And so you be more estrogen dominant. You have weight gain. Remember, mold loves fat. Women usually carry more fat on themselves than men do. Okay? Especially if they have excess estrogen. That's basically what I'm saying this in reference to. I'm not saying there's a bunch of fat women walking around, but again, so with it being lipophilic, it likes fat. So the more fat you have, the more mold can store in those fat cells, right? So a lot of times with mold detoxification, women will lose a ton of weight because the mold's getting out of those fat cells. It's also why women struggle a lot with losing weight, is if they have mold toxicity, the fat stuck, or the mold is stuck in the fat cells, and it's like, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here. I'm going to stay inflamed and swollen. That's just what it's going to be, unless you know how to get rid of it, and then you lose the weight. Okay, you go hypometabolic with mold toxicity. So continuing on from that same vein, never been in a moldy environment before. You're in this home now. One person's feeling it, one person's not. Again, check into the genetic components of it. Check into the toxicity level of it. Check in with the hormones. Are the hormones already out of balance from previously? And then again, what are your bowel habits? How well are your bowels moving? Okay. There's a lot of different pieces that are put together in this. This is why mold is such a pain in the butt for people, is they've been mistreated for years, and then they realize it can sometimes take years to get treated to get the mold out of the body, because there's all these other organ systems became affected due to exposure of the mold. So we have to take that into consideration. If we don't, then we just get treated like, your typical visit to the medical doctor, and you don't get any answers. Okay. So what do we do? This whole the whole point of this thing, okay, is for if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, man, I've been everywhere. Okay. Oh, let me talk about this one real quick here too. So toxic burden, right? I have a couple that I'm working with. Okay, I actually have a call with them today. Couple that we're working with, and the wife, stay-at-home mom, in the house 24/7. All right. So if you're a stay-at-home mom and you're in a moldy environment, you're probably getting twice the amount of exposure as your husband. So again, half the exposure, less of a toxic burden, less symptoms get expressed. Okay. And then tracing back family homes. If you've been to college, you probably lived in a moldy environment. I mean, I remember at Penn State and the frat house that I stayed in. I was not a frat boy. I will repeat, I was not a frat boy. I needed a place to stay, and the frat was so crummy that they had plenty of open rooms. So I got a room for dirt cheap. Anyways, I'm sure that place had mold in it. So anyways, what is your toxic exposure your entire lifetime? And then how long are you being exposed to your current toxic level? Okay. Now, this particular example, okay, I had been talking to this couple for a very long time. Came to me with some really horrible, like I felt so bad. She's doing so well now, but she had these horrible rashings on her hands, like blistering, looking like she had ringworm and sausage link fingers, like just swollen. And my initial thought is like, all right, what cleaning agents are you using? Using gloves when you're cleaning? You maybe have like an irritant, a food reaction, an allergy to something that you're cleaning with? No. Their home was, I think it was brand new when they first started working with me, which is pretty crazy now I'm thinking about it. I think it was brand new. It's a beautiful house. And then all of a sudden, her arms started to flare up, and they were like, what's going on? We've been working with you. She was doing really great, and now she's doing really bad, which again, mold toxicity. Most people do great during the fall to spring months. Summer months, they fall apart. Increase heat, increase humidity. Okay? That's a perfect breeding ground for mold to get stronger. So each year it can go in these cyclical cycles where the mold gets stronger and stronger. Okay? Even in a brand new home. So I'm talking to the spouse, working with the kids as well. I'm talking to the wife, working with the kids too. And the husband's like, man, like, I don't understand this. What's going on? And I'm like, there's mold in your house. Like, we eventually got to the point, I'm like, there's mold in your house. I'm like, no, it's a brand new house. There's no way there's mold. I'm like, run the test. Ran the test, boom, through the roof. And they're like, what? How? It's a brand new home. I'm like, brand new home does not mean that your home is completely mold proof. There's a lot of new builds that are going up haphazardly. And what's happening, okay, if it rains when the house is being built and then they put the walls up, they trap the moisture in there and they don't make them breathable anymore. They just seal them so freaking tight. And so that moisture is behind the walls. And sometimes they rush other things, which is what happened in this instance. So we kept doing this, going back and forth. She was trying to fight with him. He was trying to fight with her. They were trying to fight with me because they're like, I don't see any mold. It's a brand new house. It doesn't make sense. I don't get it. It just doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, guys, the test won't tell you there's mold unless there's mold, especially in a new built house. Like, it's impossible. You would have to have mold for you to test positive here. Okay. Both physically, we tested a mycotoxin on her, but we also did an ERMI test on the house. And again, it was through the roof. So had some companies come out and they were like, oh no, the house is fine. The house is fine. The house is fine. The house is fine, which is your typical mold bull crap. Everything's fine. You're fine. Just wipe the plates, do some laundry, spray this chemical down in the basement. You're fine. Run the dehumidifier, air purifiers. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine. And I'm like, guys, this is getting ridiculous, because then they went down to Florida and her hands completely cleared up. Completely. And yes, sunshine can do amazing things for your body. But when you come back home and your hands flare right back up again, you didn't just automatically lose that sunshine and vitamin D you got in Florida. You still have some residual stores of it. Okay. And then boom, hands flare. I'm like, still a problem. They're like, I can't find, no. And I'm like, there is. Trust me. So they dug a little bit more, and they sent me a picture. They sent me emails. And in the emails, I see so the house was built, I think it was built in so 3 of the 4 walls of the basement were exposed. One was built into a hillside, okay, or like built into the amount of dirt, which is normal. And they had like the walkout type basement. That is a special name for like day room or something like that. I don't know. Either way, it doesn't matter. I don't know why I'm going into that detail or why I'm spending so much time saying I don't. Either way. All right. So on the exposed sides of the basement, okay, there is a rock face, or there was a rock face. Nice, like it kind of looked like a peel and stick, like boom, put it on there. It looked great. I mean, their house, it's a freaking beautiful house. But when they put the stone up, they didn't seal it. Okay, so what happened is water from rainstorms, because they're in Ohio, it rains a lot. Rainstorms were coming down and basically were sitting on the ledge of that rock. And since it wasn't sealed, it was seeping down and getting trapped in between the OBS board, whatever that's called, and the window frame and the other boarding and backing that goes into the basement. And then again, you think adjacently, what's above it is upstairs, so then it can spread upwards as well. So they ripped off this siding, and the whole thing around the window was black and decrepit and just disgusting. And they were like, "Oh, I think we found the mold." I'm like, yeah, you did. And it turned out it was a builder issue. The builders were rushing these new built homes. And I think there was one other home in the neighborhood that dealt with the same thing. They rushed that rock face and they didn't seal behind it. And this is just people who had symptoms that knew it was an issue. And then again, if we have the genetic component, they're more susceptible. What about the people? Okay, what about the people who are in those buildings, don't have the genes to code for it and tell them, hey, you're building up toxins, That's a slow death for these people. It's hard. When we talk about mold, I'm never like, yay, I'm so excited to tell people that their house is contaminated. That does not bring me joy. It doesn't. It makes me happy that I can put an answer to their why. And they're like, hey, why am I dealing with this symptom that nobody else can find? Well, it's mold. Okay, cool. But it doesn't make me happy to tell you have mold. Mold is a bitch. It is. Because with mold comes a weakened immune system, comes risk for cancer, comes risk for recurring infections. A weakened immune system leads to infections, damage HPA axis. You basically wipe out the entire body systems that we talk about, the neuroendocrine, the GI, and the detox, all from just being exposed to mold, an environmental toxin. That's why this stuff was talked about. Mold was talked about in the Bible. And you'd have to have a priest or a pastor come and take a look at the house and see if they were going to condemn it or not. It was a plague of the home. Now, some people were like, oh, it's because it's a sign that you were a bad person and that's why your home would be whatever. But I don't say that to my patients. I don't believe that to be true. I just think that other people suck at building homes and they rush it too much. We're expanding too much as human beings. We need to calm the hell down with the expansion, especially the people in the back of my yard. Either speed up the building process and get rid of these giant mounds of dirt, or just plow it all over again, put a park up there. Anyways, little shameless plug for Vistancia. So hopefully, like when we're talking about this, hopefully this information shed light on the topic of mold. But most importantly, if you, the listener here, if you're going through your own mold journey, and you're running into the homewrecker issue, not just the mold is destroying your house, but the relationship aspect of it, please share this with your spouse. And if you're the spouse that maybe you didn't understand this level of depth of mold, and you're like, I never had any symptoms of this stuff. Now I understand why my spouse is suffering. Holy crap. And you do this inward reflection. And you're like, wow, I was being kind of rude. I didn't understand. And a lot of people, we fear what we don't know. And what we don't know, we typically refer out. And so when all of your doctors are saying, oh, it's in your head or there's nothing wrong, then by default, we're like, well, they said there's nothing wrong. So why would you continue to search if there's nothing wrong? Right? It's just how we're trained. It's how we're trained as Americans. We're trained to consume and listen to doctors. I'm telling you, question it. Question this stuff, especially when it comes to mold toxicity, so that way you can get the best health possible. Now, the question pops up a lot where and this will be to wrap this up here, but the question that pops up a lot is, well, what if I don't have symptoms? Or what if it's just my spouse that has the symptoms? Can they go stay at a Airbnb or an extended stay hotel? And then, or me and the kids fine, or the kids and I fine? Like, no. You're fortunate because you have a sensor. It's like a smoke detector in your house, okay? You rarely ever know that they're there until the battery dies at 12 o'clock at night/morning when you're not feeling well. Anyways, you never know that the smoke alarms are there until the smoke alarms go off, but you're grateful when they are there because they go off, right? Same thing with the carbon monoxide detector. You're grateful when that goes off because it caught it. You have somebody in your home who has a low-level detection signal to mold. Mold is always toxic. I don't care what your people tell you, what your friends tell you. A little bit of mold is good. Bullshit. It's not. Because if there's a little bit of mold, there's a lot of bit of mold, especially if you visually see it. What's going on behind the walls? Rip those walls out. Take a look. You'd be disgusted to see what's behind there. So it's important to know that if you're going through this process and you didn't fully understand this, listen to this again and again and again, okay? Or share it with your spouse. Like, oh my gosh, I don't really know how to word this, but I'm sorry that I didn't understand this and the severity of it, and I didn't understand how hard it was. But even if you don't have symptoms, rely on your spouse to help you stay away from danger. That is your mold alarm, okay? And some people are like, will that ever go away? What, would you want it? Would you want it to go away? I know it's inconvenient, right? When you go to churches, for example, I have a kid that we work with that can't go to church because their church building is moldy. I can't force your daughter to be okay in a toxic environment, nor would I really want you or anybody else in that toxic environment. So even if you don't have symptoms, but you find out that you're in a moldy environment, don't wait until you do, because that's what happened with this patient. Okay, I'm doing this open loop story here by accident, but we're going to finish with that, I promise. So they found the mold, okay, and then they remediated themselves. No masks, no respirators, no nothing, just let's get after it. Guess what happened to her hands? Got horribly worse. Not only that, but the husband then ended up in the emergency room. I think it was 3 times in 4 weeks, thinking that his appendix was going to burst. He had stones in his small intestines. Like, I don't know how this happens, but this is something that's dangerous. And so they tried pumping him full of antibiotics and all this extra shit. And I'm like, buddy, you finally hit that threshold. You've been in that environment. And then you went into the belly of the beast and breathed mold directly into your body. What did you think that the outcome was going to be? Right? So even if you don't have symptoms, you're accumulating toxins in your toxin bucket. At some point, you too will fall victim to this. Okay? Stressful events can tend to unlock or dump out your toxin bucket as well, and not in a good way. We'll have a lot of women who are totally fine. They'll get pregnant, be totally fine, and then boom, they have the baby, which is a stressful event. Okay, it's an intense event. And then they start exhibiting signs of mold toxicity post-pregnancy, which is a lot more difficult because then you're breastfeeding the kid. Okay? So know that if you're in this environment, even if you don't have symptoms and you're in this environment, especially with your kids, get out. Just get out. Trust me, you'll be thankful. It's a pain in the butt now, but you'll look back 10, 15 years from now and be like, thank God that I got out of that house. I know it wasn't easy for us and our family, but thank God that we did. Because I can tell you right now, it was the best decision for my wife and I that we ever made. When I had really bad mold toxicity in the house in Oakmont, Pennsylvania, she reached out to somebody online and we immediately evacuated our house. And I moved the entire home by myself, except for one couch, because I couldn't get up the stairs. but the entire house, just because she was pregnant, she was in her second trimester, I believe, and we weren't going to risk that. All right. So anyways, get out if you're in it. And then if you need help and you need support, as always, just reach out. Find me on Instagram. It's doc_Jacque. You know where I'm at. You see it's in the show notes and everything. But I wanted to do this video here today. It's a little bit longer than I have in the past, but I wanted to do this and give you my notes on why this homewrecker phenomenon still holds true. So thank you all for tuning in. Please be sure to share this, and please be sure to give me a review. Go ahead and write a little review in there as well so I can see what you love about the show, so I can continue to improve. Thank you all.